Copper and rusted iron usually taint everything he smells, but tonight, roasted garlic, heavy truffles, and expensive champagne mask it. Oliver balances a silver tray against his hip, gritting teeth against sudden, rolling kicks beneath his ribs. He's supposed to be invisible, just another nameless server pouring wine for wealthy elites. Then, heavy mahogany doors swing open. Pure panic hits him first, carried by familiar pheromones, crushed cedar and bitter frost. Damien, his ex-husband, a ruthless alpha holding his beautiful fiancée's hand. Fluorescent lights hummed an erratic, insect-like buzz above the dish pit. Oliver leaned against the stainless steel prep counter, pressing the heel of his palm into his lower back. The cheap polyester of his uniform vest trapped the heat of the kitchen against his skin, making the coarse fabric cling to his damp undershirt. His feet, crammed into discount rubber-soled shoes, throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that matched his heartbeat. "Table 4 needs the decanted Bordeaux, Ollie. Move." Chef Remy didn't look up from plating the duck confit, his voice a sharp bark over the clatter of pans and the hiss of searing meat. Oliver pushed off the counter. "Heard?" His voice was raspy, dry as sandpaper. He reached for the crystal decanter, his fingers slipping slightly on the smooth glass before he tightened his grip. 5 months. He was 5 months pregnant, and his center of gravity was shifting in ways that made him feel entirely alien in his own body. He wore a heavy binding wrap beneath his shirt, not tight enough to hurt the pup, but snug enough to flatten the soft, swollen curve of his belly into something that just looked like a stress-induced weight gain. To mask his scent, he used harsh, industrial-strength blockers. They smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol and stale vanilla, a far cry from the natural, sweet rainstorm scent that used to drive alphas mad. That used to drive one alpha mad. He pushed through the heavy double doors into the dining room. The transition from the chaotic, grease-slicked kitchen to the main floor always felt like stepping underwater. The air out here was perfectly climate-controlled, cool and thick with the low, murmuring hum of money. Silverware clinked against bone china. Subdued jazz drifted from unseen speakers. Oliver kept his eyes trained on the dark mahogany floorboards as he walked. Keep your head down. Be a ghost. That was the rule. People paying $2,000 for a dinner didn't want to look at the help. They wanted their wine glasses magically filled and their plates cleared by phantom hands. He navigated between the tables, the heavy tray balanced on his left palm, the decanter in his right. Table 4 was tucked into the exclusive alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the rain-slicked city streets. As he closed the distance, the air pressure shifted. It wasn't a metaphorical feeling. It was a tangible, heavy drop in the room's atmosphere, a sudden thickness that made the hairs on Oliver's arms stand on end. His omega biology, suppressed and battered by months of chemical blockers and exhaustion, gave a violent, desperate lurch. Pine needles, crushed cedarwood, black pepper, cold, biting frost. Oliver's breath caught in his throat. He stopped dead in his tracks, 3 feet from the table. His chest tightened so fast he thought his ribs might crack. No, it couldn't be. He forced his eyes up, fighting the instinct to bolt. Sitting in the plush leather booth, his broad shoulders stretching the seams of a charcoal bespoke suit, was Damien. Damien, the head of the city's most violent syndicate, the man who had worn Oliver's wedding ring for 3 years, the man who had signed the divorce papers without looking Oliver in the eye, handing him a severance check like he was a fired employee rather than a husband. Oliver's vision tunneled. The sounds of the restaurant faded into static. Damien looked harder than he had a year ago. The sharp planes of his jaw were shadowed with stubble. His dark hair was swept back, a few rebellious strands falling over his forehead as he stared down at his phone, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen. There was a small, white scar near his temple that hadn't been there before. Beside him sat a woman, Vivian. She was a beta, or maybe a high society omega. Oliver couldn't smell her over the suffocating dominance of Damien's scent. She was breathtaking in a sterile, manicured way. Diamond tennis bracelet, immaculate blonde hair, a silk dress that draped perfectly over her slender frame. She was laughing at something, lightly resting her manicured hand on Damien's forearm. Fiancée. The gossip rags in the break room had screamed the headline a month ago. Mafia heir takes a political bride. A sudden sharp kick hit Oliver from the inside, right against his bladder. The baby. Damien's baby. The pup was reacting to the proximity of its sire, tossing restlessly in the amniotic fluid. Oliver bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to taste the rusty tang of blood. He couldn't fall apart here. If he dropped the $300 bottle of wine, he'd be fired. If he got fired, he'd lose the dingy studio apartment, and he'd be having this baby in an alley. He swallowed the lump of bile rising in his throat. He was just a waiter. He wasn't the boy who used to wake up tangled in Damien's expensive silk sheets. He was nobody. Taking a shaky breath, Oliver forced his legs to move forward, step by step. I told them the shipping containers need to be cleared by midnight. Damien's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated straight through Oliver's bones. It was the same tone he used to use when ordering hits, the same tone he used when telling Oliver to get on his knees. I don't care about customs. Pay them double. Damien, darling, put the phone away, Vivian purred, tapping his wrist. It's our anniversary dinner. Well, our 1-month engagement anniversary. Oliver reached the edge of the table. His hands were trembling so badly, the dark red liquid in the decanter swayed, threatening to slosh over the crystal rim. He clamped his jaw shut, locking away the panicked pheromones trying to leak through his scent blockers. Good evening, Oliver murmured, keeping his voice deliberately flat, pitching it an octave lower than his natural speaking voice. The Bordeaux. Vivian didn't even look up. Finally, just pour it, and make sure it breathes. Oliver stepped into the narrow space between Damien's chair and the window. The heat radiating from the Alpha's body was intense. It smelled like danger and comfort all wrapped into one agonizing package. Oliver's hand shook as he reached for Vivian's glass. He focused entirely on the thin rim of the crystal, pouring a precise measure. Then he had to move to Damien. To do it, he had to lean slightly over Damien's shoulder. As he did, his stomach, the firm, rounded bump hidden beneath layers of wrap and polyester, brushed agonizingly close to the back of Damien's chair. Damien was still talking into his phone. Tell the Russians the deal is off if they can't. Damien inhaled. It was a sharp, sudden sound. The Alpha stopped speaking mid-sentence. His broad shoulders stiffened beneath the suit jacket. Oliver froze, the lip of the decanter hovering over Damien's glass. A single drop of dark red wine fell, splashing violently against the bottom of the crystal. Damien's nostrils flared. The scent blockers Oliver used were strong, but they weren't perfect. Beneath the harsh rubbing alcohol and the cheap vanilla, there was sweat. And beneath the sweat, there was the faint, sweet, desperate scent of a pregnant omega in distress. Damien slowly lowered his phone. The heavy silence at the table seemed to swallow the ambient noise of the restaurant. Oliver couldn't breathe. His lungs flat out refused to expand. He tried to pull his hand back, tried to step away, but his cheap rubber soles felt glued to the floorboards. Damien turned his head. Their eyes met. Damien's eyes were a pale, striking gray, usually as cold and unreadable as concrete. But right now, Oliver watched a violent tectonic shift happen behind them. Irritation morphed into confusion, then shock, and finally a raw, naked horror. Oliver didn't look like a glowing, beautiful ex-husband. He looked exhausted. His skin was sallow, bruised with purple shadows under his eyes. His hair, which Damien used to run his heavy rings through, was pulled back in a messy, grease-slicked knot, and he smelled like dish soap and fear. Oliver? Damien whispered. The name scraped out of his throat, sounding completely foreign. It wasn't a heroic reunion. It was a car crash. Damien's hand twitched. His knuckles hit the edge of his water glass. The heavy crystal tipped, dumping ice and freezing water straight across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto Vivian's lap. "Oh, Damien! What the hell?" Vivian shrieked, jumping up as the ice water soaked through her silk dress. But Damien didn't look at her. He was staring at Oliver. His eyes dropped from Oliver's terrified face down to the boxy, ill-fitting vest. With his omega senses on high alert, Damien's alpha instincts were catching up. The subtle change in Oliver's posture, the slight backward lean to counter a weight that shouldn't be there. The protective way Oliver's free arm was instinctively hovering over his stomach. "What are you—" Damien started, his voice cracking. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who ordered executions without blinking, was sitting there with his mouth slightly open, looking completely unmoored. Oliver couldn't take it. The walls were closing in, the smell of the spilled water, the sharp bite of Damien's rising, chaotic alpha pheromones, the shrill sound of Vivian complaining. It was too much. He didn't say a word. He didn't bow. He just turned, leaving the $300 decanter of Bordeaux sitting haphazardly on the edge of the table, and fled. He walked as fast as his aching feet and heavy pelvis would allow, pushing blindly through the dining room, nearly colliding with a busboy. He hit the double doors to the kitchen with his shoulder, the heavy wood slamming shut behind him. Oliver stumbled past the prep stations, ignoring Chef Remy screaming his name. He needed air. He needed to be anywhere but here. He shoved past the dishwashers, making a beeline for the alley exit in the back. He pushed the heavy metal door open and staggered out into the cool, damp night air. The alley smelled of rotting garbage and rain, but to Oliver, it was oxygen. He leaned back against the brick wall, sliding down slightly until his knees gave out. He clutched his stomach, his chest heaving with ragged, ugly sobs that tore at his throat. "Shh, shh, it's okay," he whispered to the bump beneath his vest, though he was shaking so violently his teeth chattered. The pup was doing somersaults, agitated by the spike in Oliver's adrenaline and the lingering ghost of the sire's scent. "He didn't see. He doesn't know. We're safe." He was lying to himself. The heavy metal door banged open, slamming against the brick exterior with a sound like a gunshot. Oliver flinched, his arms immediately wrapping tightly around his abdomen. Damien stood in the doorway. He looked entirely out of place in the grimy alleyway. The dim orange light of the street lamp caught the aggressive slope of his shoulders. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. He had left Vivian inside. He had left the dinner. Damien stepped into the alley, letting the door swing shut behind him, cutting off the noise of the kitchen. "Oliver!" Damien's voice was a low growl, vibrating with a terrifying mix of anger and panic. Oliver pressed himself flat against the brick, wishing he could phase through it. "Don't. Stay away from me." His voice broke on the last word, betraying his fear. Damien ignored him. He closed the distance in 3 long strides, cornering Oliver against the brick wall and the rusted iron of a dumpster. The smell of crushed cedar and bitter frost was suffocating now, heavy and demanding. "What the fuck are you doing here?" Damien demanded, his hands hovering in the air as if he wanted to grab Oliver's shoulders but was terrified of breaking him. "Why are you wearing that? Why do you smell like chemicals?" "I work here, Damien." Oliver spat, finding a sudden, desperate flare of anger. It cut through his fear. "It's called a job. People who don't have offshore blood money usually have to get them." Damien flinched as if he'd been struck. "I gave you $2 million in the settlement. I gave you the penthouse." "I burned the check," Oliver snarled, tears hot and furious in his eyes. "And I sold the penthouse to pay off the debts you left in my name, you bastard. You locked my bank accounts before the ink was even dry on the divorce papers. Did you think I was going to crawl back and beg?" Damien looked genuinely thrown. "Debts? What debts? I told my lawyers to ensure you were entirely taken care of." "Your lawyers are snakes, just like you," Oliver yelled, his hands gripping the lapels of his cheap vest. "They froze everything. I had $30 to my name when I walked out of that firm. $30 in a—" He snapped his mouth shut, realizing too late where his sentence was heading. Damien's eyes narrowed. The alpha in him was analyzing every micro-expression on Oliver's face. His gaze dropped slowly, deliberately, to where Oliver's arms were crossed protectively over his midsection. The silence stretched, thick and dangerous. A siren wailed faintly in the distance. "And a what, Oliver?" Damien stepped closer, crowding into Oliver's personal space. The heat radiating off him was immense. $30 and a what? Oliver pressed his back so hard against the brick it scraped his spine. Nothing. Just leave me alone. Go back to your shiny new fiancée. She got water on her dress. Damien didn't look away. He raised one large hand, his fingers trembling. Damien never trembled, and reached toward Oliver's stomach. Don't touch me! Oliver slapped the hand away, but the movement caused his vest to gape open slightly, revealing the thick elastic of the binding wrap he wore over his waistline. Damien stared at the wrap. He stared at the swollen curve it was desperately trying to hide. The math was doing itself in his head. 5 months since the divorce. 5 months since their last destructive, violent fight that had ended in desperate, tear-soaked claiming in the foyer of their home. Damien took a jagged breath, stumbling back half a step. The color drained completely from his face, leaving the scar near his temple standing out stark and white. You... Damien choked on the word. He looked like a man who had just taken a bullet to the chest and hadn't quite realized he was bleeding yet. I'm nothing to you, Oliver hissed, though his chin wobbled. It's mine. It has nothing to do with you. Bullshit! Damien roared, the sudden explosion of sound echoing off the brick walls. He slammed his fist into the metal dumpster, denting the steel with a sickening crunch. Oliver flinched violently, closing his eyes. When he opened them, Damien was breathing heavily, staring at his own bruised knuckles. He looked broken. The terrifying Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man drowning in his own collateral damage. You hid my pup from me, Damien whispered, the anger instantly evaporating into something entirely more dangerous. Obsession. He looked up, and his gray eyes were pitch black, dilated with primeval alpha instinct. You're carrying my child, waitering in a rat-infested kitchen, letting another alpha's beta scream at you over a spilled glass of water. Damien, no. You're done, Damien interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifying absolute calm. He reached out, wrapping a heavy warm hand around Oliver's wrist. It wasn't tight enough to bruise, but it was a vice. You're not going back inside. You're coming with me. I can't. My shift... Fuck your shift, Oliver. Damien grabbed Oliver's chin with his free hand, forcing the Omega to look at him. His thumb brushed over the dark circles under Oliver's eyes. The touch was agonizingly gentle, entirely at odds with the violence of his words. You are pregnant with my heir. You think I'm letting you out of my sight ever again? You're out of your fucking mind. Rain began to fall, fine and cold, cutting through the stagnant air of the alley. It hit Oliver's heated skin like tiny needles. He pulled against Damien's grip, his cheap rubber soles slipping on the slick, grease-stained asphalt. Let go of me. Oliver's voice lacked the command he desperately wanted it to have. It came out thin, frayed at the edges by sheer exhaustion. He twisted his wrist, but Damien's fingers were a steel trap wrapped in warm skin. Damien, I swear to God, you can't just drag me out of here. I have a life. I have a job. You had a job, Damien corrected, his voice a dead, flat rumble that sent a spike of pure terror down Oliver's spine. The Alpha didn't even look back as he hauled Oliver toward the mouth of the alley. If you ever set foot in that kitchen again, I will buy the building and burn it to the ground with the chef inside. You're psychotic, Oliver breathed, stumbling as Damien's long stride forced him to jog to keep up. The sudden movement sent a sharp, stabbing pain through his round ligaments. He gasped, a short, involuntary sound, his free hand flying to the side of his heavy stomach. Damien stopped instantly. He spun around, his chest nearly colliding with Oliver's. The raw panic in the Alpha's gray eyes was jarring. He looked at Oliver's hand, then up to his pale face. What is it? Are you hurt? Is it the pup? Damien's free hand hovered over Oliver's abdomen, his fingers trembling, desperate to touch but restrained by a millimeter of sheer willpower. I'm just tired, Oliver gritted out, panting softly. He leaned away from the heat of Damien's body. I've been on my feet for 9 hours, and you're pulling my arm out of its socket. Damien looked at his own hand wrapped around Oliver's wrist like he hadn't realized he was holding it. He released his grip as if Oliver's skin had suddenly caught fire. But before Oliver could take a step back, Damien shifted his stance, sliding one large hand to the small of Oliver's back, right above his tailbone, and the other under his elbow. It was a supportive hold, but entirely inescapable. "Walk slowly," Damien murmured, the aggressive edge melting into a suffocating, heavy protection. His scent was aggressively expanding, rolling off him in waves of crushed cedar and frost, drowning out the smell of the alley's rotting garbage. "The car is just around the corner." A heavy metal door banged open behind them. High heels clicked frantically against the wet pavement. "Damien, what on earth are you doing?" Vivian's voice was shrill, cutting through the rain. She stood under the dim awning of the restaurant's rear exit, shivering in her ruined silk dress, an umbrella held haphazardly over her perfect blonde hair. "You just walked out. The manager is having a panic attack, and you're out here in an alley with the busboy?" Damien didn't even turn his head. He kept his eyes locked on Oliver, his hand firm on Oliver's spine. "Go home, Vivian," Damien said. His voice wasn't angry. It was utterly devoid of emotion, which was somehow infinitely worse. It was the tone of a man discarding a broken pen. "Excuse me?" Vivian took a step forward, her heels wobbling on the uneven brick. "We're having our anniversary dinner. You can't just leave me here for some—" She squinted through the rain, finally getting a look at Oliver's face. Disgust wrinkled her delicate nose. "For some trashy help. Get back inside right now, or I'm calling my father." A dark, dangerous sound ripped from Damien's throat, a low, pre-verbal snarl that vibrated in the damp air. Oliver flinched, his own omega biology instantly submitting to the primal warning, his knees going weak. From the shadows near the street, a massive figure detached itself. Arthur, Damien's head of security, materialized with the silent grace of a predator. He was holding a large black umbrella, which he smoothly opened and held over Damien and Oliver, completely ignoring the rain soaking his own tailored suit. "Boss?" Arthur murmured, his eyes sweeping the alley for threats before landing briefly on Oliver. If the bodyguard was surprised to see the Mafia boss's ex-husband in a stained waiter's uniform, pregnant and shivering, he didn't show it. "The car is idling." "See that the lady gets a cab, Arthur," Damien ordered, finally breaking his stare with Oliver to glance at his bodyguard. "And call the board. Tell them the merger with her father's political action committee is permanently dead." Vivian gasped, dropping her umbrella. "Damien, you can't be serious. Millions of dollars are tied into this." "I don't care," Damien said softly. He looked down at Oliver, his thumb brushing lightly against the cheap polyester of Oliver's vest. "Nothing else matters right now." He guided Oliver forward, out of the alley and onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. A sleek, armored black SUV sat at the curb, its hazard lights blinking silently in the gloom. The back door was already open, revealing an interior of immaculate cream leather and soft, ambient lighting. Oliver dragged his feet. "Damien, please, don't do this. I don't want to go with you." "Get in the car, Oliver," Damien said, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm register again. "Don't make me pick you up. I don't know how to hold you right now without hurting him." Him. Damien already assumed the pup was a boy. The presumption made Oliver sick to his stomach, but as he looked at the hard, unyielding set of Damien's jaw and felt the bone-deep ache in his own pelvis, the fight drained out of him. He was too tired. He was too hungry. And the dark, dry interior of the car looked like heaven. Oliver ducked his head and climbed into the back seat. Leather creaked as Damien slid in beside him, bringing a rush of cold rain and suffocating pheromones into the enclosed space. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing them inside. The silence in the cabin was immediate and absolute, the soundproofing so dense it made Oliver's ears ring. The driver didn't wait for an order. The SUV smoothly pulled away from the curb, gliding into the city traffic. Oliver pressed his shoulder against the cold glass of the window, putting as much distance between himself and Damien as the spacious back seat allowed. He wrapped his arms around his waist, shivering as the damp chill of his undershirt clung to his skin. Damien watched him. Oliver could feel the weight of that stare crawling over his skin, heavy and analyzing. "Turn the heat up in the back," Damien ordered the driver, tapping the glass partition. He then reached over, his large hand invading Oliver's space, to pull a cashmere blanket from a hidden compartment. "I don't want it," Oliver muttered, turning his face toward the window, watching the neon signs of the city blur past in the rain. Damien draped it over Oliver's lap anyway. The weight of the cashmere was exquisite, smelling faintly of Damien's cologne, expensive, subtle, and sharp. Oliver hated that his treacherous body instantly relaxed beneath the warmth. His pup, agitated by the stress of the alley, settled into a slow, rhythmic rolling motion, soothed by the heavy concentration of the sire's scent in the car. "How far along are you?" Damien asked. The question hung in the quiet air, fragile as glass. Oliver bit his lower lip. He didn't want to answer. He wanted to maintain the wall of silence, to prove he couldn't be bought or bullied. But the sheer, exhausting reality of his situation pressed down on him. What was the point of lying now? 21 weeks, Oliver whispered to the window. He heard Damien suck in a sharp breath. The math was undeniably clear. 21 weeks, Damien repeated, his voice sounding hollowed out. You left 5 months ago. You knew. When you signed the papers, when you walked out of the house, you knew. I found out the morning of the settlement hearing, Oliver said, his voice flat, devoid of the tears that had burned his throat in the alley. He was numb now. I took the test in the guest bathroom because I hadn't been able to keep anything down for a week. The second line turned pink, right as your lawyers knocked on the door to tell me the terms of my departure. And you didn't tell me. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, laced with the terrifying edge of betrayal. Oliver finally turned his head, fixing Damien with a hollow, exhausted glare. Tell you? Why? So you could use the baby as a bargaining chip? So you could trap me in that house while you continued to run your empire, coming home with other people's blood on your cuffs? You looked at me across that mahogany table and told me I was a distraction, Damien. You told me the syndicate needed a united front, and my sensitivities were a liability. Damien closed his eyes. The white scar on his temple stood out sharply against his pale skin. His hands were clenched into tight fists on his knees, the knuckles white. I was trying to keep you clean. The feds were circling. The rival families were looking for a weakness. You were too soft, Oliver. You couldn't handle the reality of my world. I wanted to push you out so you wouldn't get dragged down when the indictments hit. And freezing my assets? Leaving me with nothing? Oliver's voice rose, a sharp, bitter edge slicing through his fatigue. Was that to protect me too? That was a mistake, Damien said, his eyes snapping open, blazing with a fierce, dark intensity. I told the firm to sever the joint accounts and set up a blind trust for you. I didn't know they froze your personal lines. I didn't know until tonight. He leaned forward, the smell of cedar spiking with a bitter tang of self-hatred. If I had known you were pregnant, God, Oliver, if I had known, I would have burned the city down before letting you walk out that door. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, Oliver whispered, staring at the monster he had married. Because you don't know how to love anything without locking it in a cage. Damien didn't have a response to that. He stared at Oliver, his jaw working silently. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped a screen, holding it to his ear. Dr. Eris, meet me at the safe house. Now, bring an ultrasound machine and an IV setup for fluids. I don't care if you're at a gala, Marcus. If you aren't there when I arrive, I'll find a new head of medicine. He hung up, dropping the phone onto the leather seat. I don't need a doctor, Oliver protested, though a sharp, twisting cramp in his lower back made him wince, ruining the lie. You look like a corpse, Damien said bluntly, his alpha instincts fully overriding whatever guilt he felt. He reached over, ignoring Oliver's flinch, and pressed his palm flat against the center of Oliver's chest. The heat of Damien's skin bled through the damp layers of Oliver's uniform. Your heart rate is erratic. You smell like industrial cleaner and malnutrition. You're going to let Eris look at you, and you're going to eat whatever I put in front of you. Understood? It wasn't a request. It was an absolute command, heavily laced with alpha dominance. Oliver's omega biology, starved and exhausted, forcefully dragged his chin down into a jerky, humiliating nod. Damien's eyes softened slightly at the submission, a dark satisfaction warring with his obvious panic. He slid his hand down from Oliver's chest, his fingers hesitating just above the bulky edge of the binding wrap, hiding the bump. He didn't touch it, but he stayed there, a silent, brooding guardian in the dark. The safe house wasn't a house. It was a brutalist penthouse fortress on the top floor of a high-rise completely owned by Damien's shell corporations. The private elevator opened directly into a vast, minimalist living space characterized by floor-to-ceiling bulletproof windows, dark slate floors, and harsh, recessed lighting. It felt sterile, like a very expensive operating room. Arthur remained in the elevator as the doors closed, leaving them alone. Oliver stood in the center of the foyer, feeling painfully exposed under the bright lights. The water from his damp shoes seeped into the plush gray rug. He felt like a stain on the pristine environment. The fatigue was no longer just a physical sensation. It was a heavy, leaden weight dragging his consciousness under. The edges of his vision pulsed with static. "Come here," Damien commanded softly. He had shrugged off his suit jacket, tossing it carelessly over a minimalist steel chair. He rolled up the sleeves of his dark dress shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and etched with faded ink. Oliver didn't move. He felt rooted to the spot, entirely unsure of his footing in this new reality. Damien sighed, a heavy, ragged sound, and crossed the room. He didn't grab Oliver this time. He stopped a foot away, raising his hand slowly, telegraphing his movements as if approaching a wild, easily spooked animal. "You're shivering," Damien murmured. "And you smell like those toxic blockers. We need to get that off you." He reached out, his fingers brushing the collar of Oliver's cheap uniform vest. Oliver flinched, instinctively crossing his arms over his chest, his hands hovering protectively over his stomach. "Don't," Oliver whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, just let me sleep. Put me in a guest room. Lock the door if you have to. Just don't look at me." He was ashamed. The reality of his situation was crashing down. He had spent 5 months fighting, scraping by, preserving his pride and his independence, only to be dragged back by the collar, looking like a beggar. He didn't want the alpha who had once draped him in diamonds to see the cheap, rough cotton binding flattening his pregnant belly. He didn't want Damien to see the bruised ribs, the protruding collarbones, the desperate reality of his poverty. Damien froze, his gray eyes reading the profound humiliation and fear on Oliver's face. The harsh lines of the Mafia boss's face crumbled. "Oliver," Damien breathed, his voice thick with a sudden, devastating grief. "I'm not looking at you with pity. I'm looking at you with shame. My shame, not yours." Damien didn't wait for permission this time, but his touch was incredibly, agonizingly gentle. He unbuttoned the cheap polyester vest, slipping it off Oliver's shoulders and dropping it onto the pristine rug like it was a diseased thing. Beneath the vest, Oliver wore a thin, stained white undershirt. Under that was the binder. It was a wide band of thick, elastic medical wrap, pulled tight across his midsection and secured with heavy Velcro. It was designed to support sprained ribs, not to hide a 5-month pregnancy. Damien stared at the thick white band visible through the thin cotton of the shirt. The smell of the harsh, vanilla-scented blockers was pungent here, entirely masking the natural scent of the omega beneath. "Lift your arms," Damien said, his voice barely a whisper. Oliver squeezed his eyes shut. A single, hot tear escaped, tracking through the grime on his cheek. He slowly raised his arms. Damien gripped the hem of the undershirt and pulled it over Oliver's head. The cold air of the penthouse hit Oliver's bare skin. He wrapped his arms around his chest, shivering violently. Damien fell to his knees on the floor. The alpha didn't reach out immediately. He just knelt there on the dark slate, staring at Oliver's torso. The medical wrap was tight. Too tight. It compressed the natural, beautiful swell of the pregnancy into an unnatural flat boxiness. Above the wrap, Oliver's ribs stood out in stark relief beneath his pale skin. There were dark, yellowish bruises on his hips where the cheap rubber edge of his work pants had dug in for 9 hours a day. "Christ," Damien choked out. He reached up, his large, calloused hands trembling violently as his fingers found the edge of the Velcro on the wrap. "This is so tight. How do you breathe? How does he move?" "It doesn't hurt him," Oliver defended weakly, though his voice shook. "The doctor at the free clinic said the amniotic sac protects him. It just hides the shape." Damien's jaw locked. He gripped the Velcro and ripped it backward in one sharp, fluid motion. The sound of the tearing adhesive echoed loudly in the quiet room. As the thick elastic gave way, the compression vanished. Oliver let out a long, ragged gasp as his lungs finally expanded to their full capacity. The heavy, swollen curve of his belly, restricted for hours, suddenly dropped forward, rounding out into its natural, prominent shape. The skin across his abdomen was pale and taut, a stark contrast to his protruding hip bones. Simultaneously, the release of the binder broke the seal on the industrial scent blockers Oliver had rubbed into his skin. The stench of rubbing alcohol evaporated, immediately replaced by a staggering, overwhelming wave of pure omega pheromones. It was a torrential downpour of sweet rain, blooming jasmine, and the heavy, intoxicating richness of an omega carrying an alpha's air. It hit the room like a physical shockwave. Damien let out a choked, wet sound. He buried his face directly against the soft curve of Oliver's bare stomach, his arms wrapping tightly around the back of Oliver's thighs, anchoring himself. Oliver gasped, his hands flying down to tangle in Damien's dark hair to push him away. But he couldn't. The sheer heat of the alpha's face against his skin, the vibrating rumble of Damien's purr, a deep, primeval sound vibrating in the alpha's chest, sent a catastrophic wave of relief through Oliver's exhausted body. The baby reacted instantly. A sharp, distinct kick struck right where Damien's cheek was pressed against Oliver's skin. Damien flinched, his head snapping back. He looked up at Oliver, his gray eyes wide, completely unmasked and shining with unshed tears. He placed his large, warm hand flat over the spot where the kick had landed. Another thump against his palm. A greeting. Damien broke. The ruthless head of the city's underworld bowed his head, resting his forehead against the pale skin of Oliver's belly, his broad shoulders shaking silently. He didn't speak. He didn't make a sound. He just held on as if Oliver were the only thing tethering him to the earth. Oliver stood there, his bare feet freezing on the slate floor, his fingers still tangled in his ex-husband's hair. He hated Damien. He hated him for the divorce, for the coldness, for the poverty, for Vivian. But as he looked down at the man kneeling before him, completely shattered by the weight of a life he had almost destroyed, Oliver felt the first terrifying crack in his own armor. The chime of the private elevator interrupted the silence, signaling the arrival of the doctor. The nightmare of the alley was over, but looking at Damien's desperate, suffocating grip, Oliver knew an entirely different kind of nightmare was just beginning. Footsteps echoed sharply against the slate flooring. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft metallic hiss, sealing the penthouse once more. Dr. Elias Aris stepped into the sterile brightness of the foyer, a heavy black medical case gripped in his left hand. He took one look at the scene, the ruthless head of the city's criminal underground on his knees, his face buried against the bare, swollen stomach of a trembling, half-naked server, and stopped dead. Aris was a man who had dug bullets out of mob enforcers on kitchen tables, but this sight made him hesitate. "Damien," Aris said gently, his voice a calm, practiced baritone. He set the case down. "I need you to move." Damien didn't look up. His hands tightened their grip on the back of Oliver's thighs. A low, warning rumble vibrated in the alpha's chest, a completely involuntary, territorial response to another alpha entering the space while his pregnant omega was exposed and vulnerable. Oliver flinched at the sound, his nails digging reflexively into Damien's scalp. The sudden pain seemed to snap Damien out of the primal haze. The Mafia boss blinked, his breathing ragged, and slowly pulled his face away from Oliver's skin. He looked at Eris, his gray eyes guarded but completely frantic. "He's 21 weeks," Damien said, his voice raw. He stood up slowly, positioning his large body half between Oliver and the doctor. He was wearing a compression binder for 9 hours a day. He smells like cheap chemicals, and he's practically a skeleton. Eris maintained his professional neutrality, stepping forward and opening his bag. "Let's get him to the sofa. I need to run an ultrasound and check his vitals. Mr. Sterling?" "Oliver, it is good to see you again. Let's get you lying down." Oliver didn't want to move. His legs felt like lead pipes filled with sand. But Damien was already there, scooping him up before Oliver could protest. The movement was so fluid, so carefully calculated to avoid putting any pressure on Oliver's abdomen, that it made Oliver's throat ache. Damien carried him to the massive, low-profile leather sofa in the center of the living room and laid him down against the pillows, immediately pulling a heavy throw blanket over Oliver's bare chest to preserve his dignity. "I can walk," Oliver muttered, glaring at the ceiling. His voice sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "You can barely stand," Damien countered softly, hovering near Oliver's shoulders. The scent of crushed cedar and frost was suffocating now, a heavy, oppressive blanket of protection. Eris wheeled a portable ultrasound machine to the edge of the sofa. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He took Oliver's blood pressure, his brows furrowing slightly at the reading, and then drew a vial of blood with quick, clinical precision. Oliver stared at the puncture mark on his pale inner arm. He had spent months avoiding doctors, terrified that a clinic might flag his name or that Damien's expansive network might catch wind of a pregnant Omega with his exact description. "Lift the blanket just above the hips, please," Aris instructed. Oliver hesitated, his hands gripping the edge of the cashmere throw. He hated this. He hated being a specimen. He hated that Damien was watching with a hunger that bordered on starvation. Slowly, he pushed the fabric up, exposing the round, taut curve of his stomach. Eris squeezed a generous dollop of clear gel onto the transducer wand. "This will be cold." It was freezing. Oliver hissed sharply as the wand pressed into his skin. Damien's hand shot out, grabbing Oliver's clammy fingers. Oliver tried to pull away, but Damien intertwined their fingers, his grip unyielding. The heat from Damien's palm was a stark contrast to the icy gel, and despite everything, Oliver's frantic pulse began to slow. His treacherous, exhausted biology recognized its mate. Eris moved the wand in slow, deliberate arcs. The screen of the machine flickered to life, displaying a grainy black and white static that slowly resolved into a shape. Then, Iris flipped a switch on the console. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The sound filled the cavernous, empty space of the penthouse. It was fast, rhythmic, and incredibly strong. The heartbeat of the pup. Damien stopped breathing. His grip on Oliver's hand tightened to the point of pain, but Oliver didn't complain. He turned his head to look at Damien. The ruthless alpha, the man who ordered hits and controlled the city's ports with an iron fist, was staring at the small monitor with tears tracking silently down his cheeks. He looked completely dismantled. "Strong heartbeat," Eris noted, his eyes scanning the measurements on the screen. 155 beats per minute. Fluid levels are acceptable, though slightly on the lower end of the normal range. Growth parameters look to be at about 20 weeks, so he's measuring slightly small, but nothing alarming yet. "He?" Damien choked out, his eyes glued to the screen. Eris offered a small, tired smile. "Yes, it's a boy. Clear as day." Oliver closed his eyes. A boy. An alpha heir. The one thing Damien's syndicate demanded. The one thing that meant Oliver would never, ever be allowed to leave this cage again. The binder didn't cause permanent physical trauma to the fetus, Aris continued, wiping the excess gel from Oliver's stomach with a warm towel. The amniotic sac is remarkably resilient. However, Oliver is severely dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from acute exhaustion. His cortisol levels are likely astronomical, which isn't good for the pup's neurological development. He needs an IV drip tonight, strict bed rest for the next week, and a high-calorie diet. And absolutely no stress. Eris packed his bag, standing up to face Damien. You need to keep him calm, Damien. Whatever's going on between the two of you, table it. If his blood pressure spikes again, he could go into early labor. Damien nodded, his eyes dark and hollow. Whatever he needs. Eris left, the elevator doors swallowing him whole. The silence that followed was heavy, choked with words neither of them knew how to say. Damien hooked up the IV bag of fluids Eris had left behind, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he taped the needle to the back of Oliver's hand. "Are you hungry?" Damien asked, his voice rough. Oliver looked away, staring at the rain lashing against the bulletproof glass. "I want to go to sleep." Damien didn't argue. He carefully slid his arms under Oliver, lifting him from the sofa. He carried him down the long, shadowed hallway to the master suite, laying him gently in the center of a massive king-sized bed. The sheets were dark silk, cool and expensive. Oliver turned on his side, curling around his stomach, facing away from the empty expanse of the mattress. He heard the rustle of clothing as Damien stripped off his shirt and trousers. The mattress dipped behind him, heavy and warm. Damien didn't touch him. He lay rigidly on his own side of the bed, the distance between them vast and deliberate. But the scent of crushed cedar filled the room, wrapping around Oliver like a physical embrace, soothing the aching ligaments in his pelvis and lulling the restless pup to sleep. Oliver closed his eyes, a bitter tear soaking into the silk pillowcase. He was safe, he was warm, and he had completely lost the war. Morning broke over the city in streaks of bruised purple and dull gray. Oliver woke to the smell of strong coffee, roasted butter, and caramelized sugar. He opened his eyes, the heavy silk duvet slipping off his shoulders. The IV had been removed from his hand, a small circular bandage taking its place. He sat up slowly, his lower back protesting with a dull ache. The frantic gnawing hunger that had been his constant companion for the last 4 months was roaring in his stomach. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed. His cheap, stained uniform was gone. In its place, someone had dressed him in one of Damien's heavy, oversized cashmere sweaters. It fell to his mid-thigh, soft and outrageously warm. Oliver walked barefoot out of the bedroom, his steps silent on the thick rugs. Damien was in the kitchen. He was dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up. He was plating a staggering amount of food, eggs, thick-cut bacon, fresh fruit, and pastries. He looked up as Oliver entered. The alpha looked like he hadn't slept for a single second. The dark circles under his gray eyes rivaled Oliver's. "Sit," Damien instructed, pulling out a stool at the sleek marble island. Oliver didn't want to obey, but his knees were weak and his stomach gave a violent, embarrassing rumble. He sat down. Damien slid a plate in front of him, along with a glass of expensive fortified orange juice. Oliver picked up a fork. He tried to eat slowly, to preserve some scrap of dignity, but the taste of real hot food that didn't come from a discounted dented can or kitchen scraps, overwhelmed his senses. He ate mechanically, desperately. Damien watched him, leaning against the counter, a cup of black coffee untouched in his hand. The alpha's jaw was tight, his eyes tracking every bite Oliver took. "I sent Arthur to your apartment," Damien said quietly. Oliver froze, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. "Why?" "To pack your things. To close the lease." Damien took a sip of his coffee, his eyes flat. "You don't live there anymore." A hot, familiar spike of anger pierced through the fog of Oliver's exhaustion. He slammed the fork down onto the marble, the loud clatter echoing in the quiet kitchen. "You have no right. You can't just send your thugs to my home and declare my life over. I had things there, things I paid for. You lived in a 300-square-foot walk-up with black mold in the bathroom and a broken deadbolt." Damien fired back, his voice rising, the terrifying edge of the Mafia boss bleeding through. "Arthur said the mattress was on the floor. There was no food in the fridge, Oliver. Nothing but tap water and a half-empty jar of peanut butter. You were starving my pup to death to prove a point." "I was surviving," Oliver yelled, pushing the plate away, ignoring the sudden, frantic kicking against his bladder. "I was surviving because you left me with nothing, because your firm froze my credit, because my name was toxic to every employer in the city the second I was no longer under your protection. I scrubbed dishes until my hands bled because it was the only place that paid under the table. You don't get to judge my apartment when you built the walls that trapped me in it." Damien recoiled as if physically struck. The anger vanished, leaving behind that same shattered, hollow expression from the alley. He set his coffee cup down, his hands bracing against the edge of the marble counter. "You're right," Damien whispered, the admission sounding like broken glass in his throat. "I broke you. I pushed you away. I thought if I cut the ties completely, the Volkov family wouldn't see you as a target. I thought making it look like an ugly, bitter divorce would keep you off their radar. It was a strategy. I am a person, Damien," Oliver breathed, his voice trembling violently. "Not a chess piece, not a strategy. You cut me out of your life, and then you paraded a beautiful, politically connected blonde around the city a month later." Damien looked up, his gray eyes flashing with sudden, vicious clarity. "Vivian is a shield. Her father is the district attorney. The engagement was a public relations stunt to keep the feds off my shipping containers. I have never touched her. I have never scented her." Damien took a step around the island, closing the distance between them. "There has been no one else, Oliver. Not since the day you walked out. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could smell was rain and jasmine. It was driving me insane." Oliver laughed, a harsh, cynical sound that scraped his throat. "Well, that makes it all perfect then. You didn't sleep with her. You just publicly humiliated me and left me to starve while you played Mafia politics. I will kill her father if it makes you feel better," Damien said. He said it so casually, with such chilling sincerity, that Oliver's breath hitched. "I will burn the entire political action committee to ash. I'll buy the restaurant you worked at and bulldoze it. Tell me what you want, Oliver. Tell me what to destroy to make you forgive me." Oliver stared at the man he had married. Damien didn't understand. He only knew how to fix things with violence and money. He didn't know how to fix trust. "I don't want you to destroy anything," Oliver said wearily, wrapping his arms around his stomach. "I want my autonomy back. I want to know that I'm not just a prisoner here because I happen to be an incubator for your heir." Damien flinched at the word incubator. He fell to his knees in front of Oliver's stool, ignoring the expensive slacks against the floor. He reached out, his large hands wrapping gently around Oliver's bare ankles. "You are not a prisoner," Damien swore, his voice a low, desperate gravel. "But I am begging you on my knees, do not run from me again. Stay. Let me take care of you. Let me protect him." He rested his forehead against Oliver's knees. "If you try to leave me again, Oliver, I think it will actually kill me." The rain continued for 3 days. 3 days of enforced bed rest. 3 days of Damien acting as a suffocating, hyper-vigilant shadow. Oliver learned the new rhythm of his gilded cage. Arthur brought in high-end maternity clothes, soft fabrics that didn't chafe or bind. A private chef appeared in the kitchen, cooking nutrient-dense meals that made Oliver's head spin with the richness of them. But it was Damien who was the constant. The Alpha didn't leave for the syndicate headquarters. He conducted his brutal, bloody business from the penthouse office, the heavy oak doors shut. But he emerged every 2 hours to check on Oliver. One evening, a week after the alley, Oliver was sitting on the sofa, a book open unread on his lap. He was watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. His stomach felt heavy, the pup unusually active, shifting and rolling with an intensity that made Oliver gasp softly. The door to the office opened. Damien walked out. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, his tie loosened. The sharp metallic scent of stress and adrenaline rolled off him. He had been dealing with a shipment gone wrong. Damien stopped when he saw Oliver wince. He set the glass down immediately and crossed the room, kneeling beside the sofa. "Is he hurting you?" Damien asked, his hand hovering over Oliver's stomach, waiting for permission. Oliver looked at the Alpha's hand. He was so tired of fighting. The resentment was still there, a hard, cold knot in his chest, but the exhaustion was heavier. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Damien gently placed his large, warm palm against the swell of Oliver's stomach. The heat bled through the soft cotton of Oliver's shirt. Instantly, the frantic kicking slowed. The pup pressed against the inside of Oliver's skin, chasing the heavy warmth of the sire's hand. Damien let out a long, shaky breath, his thumb stroking soothing circles against the fabric. I canceled the merger, Damien said quietly into the silence of the room. Vivian's father is threatening to unleash the DA's office on my legal businesses. The Volkovs are taking advantage of the chaos and pushing into our territory at the docks. Oliver stiffened. Why are you telling me this? You said I was too soft to handle your world. Because I was wrong. Damien looked up, his gray eyes pinning Oliver with a startling vulnerability. I treated you like glass, and in doing so, I shattered you myself. You survived 5 months on the streets with nothing, protecting my child while I sat in an ivory tower thinking I was a god. You aren't soft, Oliver. You're the strongest person I have ever known. Oliver swallowed hard, his throat tight. Damien, I don't expect you to forgive me, Damien continued, his voice steady but heavy with regret. I know I broke the trust between us. I know you look at me and see the man who threw you away. I can't erase that. He moved his hand from Oliver's stomach, reaching up to gently cup Oliver's jaw. His thumb brushed over the fading purple shadows under Oliver's eyes. But I am going to spend the rest of my life making you realize that you are the only thing in this world that matters to me. Not the syndicate, not the money, just you and him. Oliver didn't pull away from the touch. He closed his eyes, leaning slightly into the heavy calloused warmth of Damien's palm. You can't trap me here, Damien, Oliver whispered, a single tear slipping past his lashes. If we are going to do this, if I'm going to stay, it has to be my choice. You have to let me have a life. I won't be a secret you hide in a penthouse. You will never be a secret again, Damien vowed fiercely. Once the Volkov threat is neutralized, we will go wherever you want. Do whatever you want. I will give you the world, Oliver. Just let me be in it with you. Oliver opened his eyes, looking at the ruthless Mafia boss kneeling on the floor, stripped of all his terrifying armor. It wasn't a fairy tale. The man before him had blood on his hands and a darkness in his soul that would never fully wash clean. They had a history painted in bitter arguments, devastating betrayals, and cold divorce papers. The scars wouldn't fade just because they were back in the same room. Oliver knew there would be days he would look at Damien and feel the ghost of that cheap polyester vest scraping his skin. There would be days he would want to scream at the Alpha for the months of terror and hunger. But as the pup settled into a peaceful rhythm beneath Damien's protective hand, and the scent of crushed cedar and frost wrapped around him, anchoring him to the present, Oliver felt the tight, cynical knot in his chest loosen just a fraction. He didn't say, I love you. He didn't offer absolute forgiveness. Instead, Oliver slowly lifted his own hand, placing it over Damien's where it rested against his jaw. Okay, Oliver whispered into the quiet room. We start here. Damien closed his eyes, letting out a breath that sounded like a sob, and pressed his lips softly, reverently, against the inside of Oliver's wrist. It was a messy, fractured beginning. But as the rain washed the city outside, Oliver finally felt the cold grip of survival loosen its hold. They were broken, imperfect, and tied together by blood and a heartbeat. And for tonight, that was enough. Wow, what an incredibly intense and emotional journey. Damien finally dropped his ruthless Mafia armor to face the damage he caused, and Oliver proved that true strength isn't about being untouchable, but about surviving the darkest moments. It's a messy, imperfect truce, but they are finally starting to heal together. Do you think Damien can truly protect Oliver from the incoming Mafia war, or will his violent world threaten their fragile new beginning? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you love this raw Omegaverse story, smash that like button, share this video, and hit subscribe for more.